And then Tom, if you could go on to the next slide, please. So welcome to this talk from Saving Devon's Treescapes at Devon Wildlife Trust. We are a partnership project which exists because of ash dieback disease. And so we are running the project on behalf of the Devon Ash Dieback Resilience Forum, and it's very much a partnership project. So we're working in conjunction with a very large number of partners across the county and national organisations as well. And we're sponsored by the National Heritage Lottery Fund, One Tree Planted, and other funders too. Next slide, please, Tom. So I'm the Citizen Science Officer on the project, and Saving Devon's Treescapes is a 5-year project which started in 2020, and we're now in the 2nd year of delivery. It exists, as I mentioned just now, because of ash dieback disease, which is anticipated over the course of the next 10 years or so to kill or definitely seriously harm over 90% of the ash trees in the county. And that's a very big deal because the ash tree is the 2nd most common tree in Devon outside of woodlands. And so the focus of our project in terms of habitats is on trees outside of woodland. So we're not a woodland creation project. But one of the main aims of the project over the 5-year period is to support local communities to plant and nurture more trees, to make our treescapes in the county more resilient for the future, so that if the next disease comes along, as it inevitably and sadly will do at some stage, we've got a broader diversity of broadleaf native species in the county that hopefully means the treescapes will be more resilient for the large range of biodiversity that they support. So citizen science comes into that because there are a number of key species which we'll be monitoring throughout the project, which can tell us something about the health of our treescapes, and particularly in some cases looking at the health of the ash trees as well. So for example, we're monitoring brown hair street butterflies, which have a dependence on the ash canopy, because that's where the adults feed. We're also looking at various species of lichen, which are particularly dependent on ash, and other species of trees which have similar bark properties to the ash. And I'm also running the Devon bat survey, which obviously bats are dependent on trees for the way that they navigate around, and also the insects which live around woodland and tree communities for their feeding and foraging. So it's just a few examples, but of course trees themselves are a key species. And we are also, therefore, monitoring trees and tree health. And that's what the subject of this evening's presentation is all about. It's getting you interested, hopefully, in recording for us notable trees around the county. And Tom will explain a bit later what a notable tree is and how you can spot one. And we'll also talk about how you can record them. But within the county, we've got 5 focus areas, and they're shown on that map there to the left with blue areas. So South Devon, below sort of Marlborough, Kingsbridge area, Torbay, Exeter and Cranbrook, the Coley Valleys in the east of the county, and Niroche and the Blackdown Hills, which actually crosses the border over into Somerset as well. If you want to read a bit more about the project and all of the various tasks that we are getting involved in, you can find more about it on the Devon Wildlife Trust website. Just search for Saving Devon's Treescapes. The link is at the bottom of that slide there. Next slide, please, Tom. And over to you.
Okay, I think, yeah, that's over to me. Thank you very much, Lindsay. And hello, everyone. Great to have so many of you join us this evening. So my name's Tom Reed, and I work for the Woodland Trust. I've been with the Trust for over 3.5 years now, working on a project called the Ancient Tree Inventory. My role is essentially to manage the project. I cover sort of a national remit, sort of a UK-wide remit. And the Ancient Tree Inventory, in essence, is like a living database of ancient, veteran and notable trees. So we've already sort of heard those terms in the introduction. And as Lindsay said, I'm going to be talking a bit about what we mean by those terms, how you can recognise these trees, and a little bit of information about how to record them as well. So just to say, obviously, we're not going to be talking specifically in depth about the Ancient Tree Inventory as a project itself. I think there are a lot of parallels between, you know, the kind of recording methodology and what we record, between what Devon Wildlife Trust want to do and what the Woodland Trust are recording. Hence why it made sense, you know, for me to come and sort of talk a little bit about how to recognise these trees. But if you are interested in looking at the Ancient Tree Inventory, strongly recommend visiting our website. Worth me just saying it's a collaboration between the Woodland Trust, the Tree Register and the Ancient Tree Forum. So you may see their logos appear in other materials that reference the Ancient Tree Inventory as well. And yeah, like I say, if you want to visit our website, it's basically Ancient Tree Inventory. Is if you search on Google, it will be the first thing that comes up, or our URL is ati.woodlandtrust.org.uk. And this is just a screenshot from one of our web pages, which I think will be really useful for you to know about. We'll be making sure that this link gets circulated in a follow-up email as well. But essentially, if you go on our website and you click on how to record, there's lots of recording guidance, which goes into more detail than I'm going to go into tonight in terms of how to record. And we've got some really cool videos that we published last year that are visible on our resources webpage. Strongly recommend taking a look at that. We've got a PDF that you can download and look at for more information as well as like some tree recording forms. So have a look at that after the session, and that will give you more guidance on how to record. But for the purpose of tonight, we're really going to look at, what do we record and why do we record it mostly. So yeah, what I suppose it's first start thinking about, why do we actually value ancient trees? Well, first of all, I think it's safe to say many people in the audience here tonight will probably look at this tree and probably automatically place value on it. You look at that and you think, wow, that's an amazing tree. I don't think anyone here would disagree. I'd be surprised anyway. But it's only when you start to think about, why do we look at that and go, wow, what sort of challenge your own thinking, and why do we place value on these trees? I wanted to just kind of like talk about that initially. Just before I do, I just want to say, when people think of ancient trees, this is probably what you might picture in your mind, a tree like this, or the one sort of behind me on my screen. Worth saying that not all ancient trees are like this. And in fact, actually, if we were to go out only looking for trees like this, we may be disappointed, because trees like this, they're both oak in Lincolnshire. There are very few of these trees of this enormous size. Ancient trees are very rare. But we'll be showing you tonight how different species reach different sort of sizes, have different life expectancies. So I would say maybe think of this image as the upper end of the spectrum in terms of what you might find. We'll be sort of covering a bit about the range of what you might expect to find as an ancient tree later in the talk. So in terms of why we value trees, or ancient trees specifically, we place value on things differently, don't we? Some people might value ancient trees as part of their ecology, the wildlife, from like a nature point of view. Some may be interested in ancient trees from a cultural or heritage point of view, or historical. I think this is why I love this subject, because there is something for everyone. Yeah, and it's a very accessible project in terms of what is involved in recording trees. Hopefully after tonight's talk, you'll feel like it's something that's rewarding, but also very easy and accessible to do as well. But first of all, just wanted to start by talking about what is probably the first one that comes to mind, is I suppose I'm saying that from the perspective of a conservation charity as well, but their ecological value. So ancient trees and what we call veteran trees are enormously valuable for wildlife. I often describe them as being disproportionately valuable for wildlife because of the range of habitats that they have. So here we've got an example on screen here of an ancient beech tree, and you can see the first thing that jumps out is just the extent of the fungi, like the bracket fungi that are on the side of the trunk of this tree. Now, these may not always be visible at all times of year. When they get established like this, more likely those larger brackets are gonna stay. But it's worth saying that what you see there is just like what you're seeing on the surface of the fungi. The true work of a fungus is happening inside, and it's often not visible. This is an indicator that this tree is probably hollowing quite extensively in the center of the trunk. We can't see that, but within that hollow there is huge amount of biodiversity just happening, you know, the microscopic life that we can't see, you know, the array of fungal life and insect life as well that could be sort of benefiting from the habitat created by that hollow that the decaying fungus has created. That's what makes ancient trees so valuable. Ultimately, it's that decaying wood and decaying habitats that create these array of micro habitats across the tree, not just in the trunk, but across the whole canopy. So that's one of their almost like defining features that we'll come back to a lot in this talk, is the decaying wood habitats. If I just go to the next slide, you can see that in a little bit more detail. This is an example of a tree that is hollowed so much that it's actually split open, and it gives a glimpse of what's happening inside, what we couldn't see in the previous slide. And you can see here, this is an example of what we call brown cubicle rot. So when we think of rot, you know, you may just think rot is just generally decomposing matter, but there are actually various different stages of rots, and this is what we call brown rot. And this, as you can see there, if you put yourself in the shoes of an insect or a microorganism or a fungus, you know, you can imagine the micro habitats, just the scale, you know, a whole world of habitat, you know, within this one column of decaying wood is really vast. And that's just a great picture there that shows that quite well. Often you'll see this, you can pick it up and crumble it in your fingers, and it will break into these kind of cubical pieces, hence the name cubic rot. So it's a good thing to look out for, really, is, you know, fungi, rot like this is like a defining feature of like late stage decay. So in addition to, you know, we've seen some shots of the trunk there, but like I said before, it's not just a case of what's going on in the trunk. You know, take a look around the whole canopy and think about what features can I see, what evidence of hollowing can I see. It's not just in the trunk, you may see it in the branches as well. You get like these bigger holes which are of benefit to, you know, birds, mammals, you know, larger organisms. Even, you know, reptiles like grass snakes are known to use ancient and veteran trees as well. And you can see on this image as well, we've got some examples of epiphytes. So we've got moss growing there. Epiphytes is sort of like a technical term for plants that grow above ground level. So in the case of ancient trees, we may see things like mosses, ferns, lichens, even what we call cuckoo trees, where you get other trees growing in the canopy of much larger trees. So when looking for old trees, often you will see these physical features and habitats. That's sort of one of the reasons why we value them and why we want to record them. But like I said before, it's not just a case of their like ecological interest. Ancient and veteran trees are hugely, you know, important from a heritage point of view as well. The slide here that we've got, this actually isn't taken in England, this is taken in Madrid, and this is you got a collection of pollards here. So pollards are trees that have been cut above ground level, normally at about 2 meters in height, or just over head height. It was done to kind of keep, you know, accessible wood out of reach of browsing herbivores like deer, livestock. In absence of power tools, you know, the people who used to work this land could more, you know, readily harvest that timber. Because when you cut the tree at an early age, it grows back into smaller stems, and you can cut those easy with hand tools. And you can see this this image in the foreground, but also look at the trees in the background. They all look of a similar sort of age. You can clearly tell they're all pollards that are part of and still being managed as pollards today. These are what you might call working trees, in the sense that they were, you know, used for timber, used by the people who used to manage the land for both timber harvesting, but also, you know, rearing their livestock as well. So you can think of this as almost like an outdoor museum. You know, these are the very trees that for hundreds of years will have been managed and worked as part of the landscape, and you can still see them today. They're a very irreplaceable link to our past. So that's also why, you know, we value them. And we've got a few more slides actually, which show a similar thing. This is from the UK. This is the wishing tree at Ashtead Common. So again, you can see here, it's a lapsed pollard. So unlike the previous slide where you could see those trees were still being managed, you had that bushier kind of growth. If I just go back, you can see this bushy growth indicates that this is still being managed as a working landscape. This is less so. You can still see the pollard form. You can see this kind of characteristic pollard knuckle that's sort of swollen at around 2 meter height from ground level, and you've got these smaller stems that converge on the trunk, indicating that this was probably once managed as a pollard, but for quite a while now has not been so. And you know, there's another sort of cultural link here, in that, you know, this tree we know it was often visited by sort of schools and children to leave wishes. It was known as the wishing tree, and, you know, people tied ribbons to it and, you know, made wishes. And, you know, there's some extra kind of cultural interest there. That's sort of a connection between both the people who have visited this landscape and the trees themselves. So do keep in mind those kind of cultural links. Another one just to mention before I move on to the historical aspects, think about yew trees in churchyards. That's another great example. So we'll often find ancient and veteran yew trees associated with churchyards and cemeteries. They were actually sort of been managed deliberately in that sense, because they've been retained. Early Druids and pagans valued yew trees because they thought they were sort of a bridge between the underworld and the living world, and this is almost like worshipped as deities, as like a respected religious figure, and that's why, you know, many of our early churchyards, you know, and the early Christians who kind of, I guess, took over those early former sites of worship from the Druids and pagans, you know, retained that respect for yew trees. And that's why today we see so many, you know, churchyards with big old yew trees. So there's a really, really important cultural link. And we also talk about their kind of historic value as well. So just to kind of make the distinction, because some people often say, well, what's the difference between why is cultural value different to historic? What we mean by historic is a link to probably a person or an event. So what the tree we have on screen here is the major oak at Sherwood Forest. And I'm sure I don't need to explain that, you know, Sherwood Forest and the legend of Robin Hood go hand in hand. You know, this tree, there are myths that, you know, Robin Hood may well have used this particular tree, or you know, resided near to it. There's a lot of kind of myth and folklore associated with the landscape and this tree and what it may have witnessed. So but not just the kind of the myth and story side of things, but when we see photographs like this, where you've got, these are the Victorian workers installing the metal braces that you can see today. So when you visit the major oak, you can see that it's been propped up, and it's got like these metal sort of shards that have been welded to it to try and brace it together. And you know, these are the people who are doing that, and they've taken the time to even have their photo taken in front of the tree. You know, they clearly placed value on this tree, and it's a moment in the tree's history that we can sort of look back on and have documented evidence for. So I think that's also very interesting. But in addition to that, I think, you know, it's safe to say that we value ancient trees simply because they are beautiful, and we want to see them cherished and respected and valued, and there for many years to come, so they can be enjoyed by future generations. I really do think that they add an important character to our countryside as well. You know, can you imagine this scene without this, you know, lovely hollow ash pollard there? And think about your kind of, you know, historic parklands, you know, our ancient woodlands, deer parks. You know, if you think of like the British countryside, I think ancient trees play a hugely important role in kind of defining what our countryside looks like, really. think of those lovely old trees in our hedgerows and wood pastures and uplands as well. So that is another reason why we value them. Here's another example of this is actually a medieval deer park. You know, it's often a kind of a landscape that we see a lot of in the UK compared to, you know, let's say Europe, you know, other areas of Northern Europe and Eastern Europe, where you don't really see this landscape as much as you do in the UK. And it's the big trees and old trees are a defining feature of that. But, you know, essentially you can find ancient trees in other landscapes as well. We certainly don't want people to think that you can only find them in these areas. And we'll talk a bit later about, you know, the different landscapes and places where you might find ancient and veteran trees. So we've already kind of talked about this a little bit, I suppose, but, you know, I really wanted to focus now on and give some guidance on what to look for when looking for ancient and veteran trees. When you think of an ancient tree, you may have, again, this image in your mind of like a big, gnarly old tree that's sort of hollowing and decaying, and that you can really just tell that it's lived a life. You sort of wears the scars of its aging, and just looks like what you might call a wow tree. You know, a tree that just stops you in your tracks and makes you, you know, want to take a photo of it, and that just stands out as an exceptional tree. And that kind of, I suppose, at the early days of the ancient tree hunt, which was the founding project of the ancient tree inventory, I guess that was kind of the aim and the advice at the time was, you know, go look for trees that look like this, that are big and hollowing. Whereas, you know, we've kind of moved beyond that, and, you know, recognizing other species that may be smaller. The common thing to look for, though, is for those trees which show ancient and veteran features, or what we call decay features. And this image here just shows the variety that you might expect to find. It's worth saying that, you know, with this tree on the slide is almost maybe too perfect. You know, you may not expect to see a tree with all of these features. Sometimes you may only see 3 or 4 of these features like well established, but it just goes to show that, you know, you can find evidence of age throughout the whole tree. You know, looking at the base of the tree in this image here, you can see the tree is hollowing in the base. You know, you've got these buttressing roots that you can see, and the tree has got, you know, large bracket fungi, again evidencing the fact that this tree is almost certainly hollowing in the center, even though that may not always be visible. We've got hollowing branches if we go further up the trunk there. In some cases, the branches have snapped away or are partly hanging on. You've even got woodpecker holes, areas where the bark has peeled away, and you can see evidence of invertebrates, you know, boring holes into the dead wood. You can see like birds' nests and other hollowing branches further up. So my advice is always to look around the whole tree. You know, don't just look at the one profile, but take time to walk around, you know, all angles of the tree as well, and look for these signs of aging. We have got some photos coming up to sort of talk through some of these in a bit more detail. So one of the I guess key defining features of ancient trees especially is that they will typically have a very large girth for their species. In fact, even with this image here, you don't have to see the rest of the tree. All we can see is like a tiny bit of the, you know, the lower part of the trunk, and already most of us would probably say that's an old tree just from that one photograph, simply because we can see it's clearly a large girth. You can see the person in the photograph with their arms stretched out. You know, how many people would it take to, you know, cover the whole circumference of the trunk if they were to do that? This tree is probably in excess of about 7 meters in girth, I believe, so 7 or 8 meters, and you can see those physical features. You see the gnarliness and the knobbliness, but its overall size is just an instant giveaway that it's probably an old tree. And obviously the reason we measure the girth of a tree is because it's almost a proxy for how old it might be. And I say that with caution, because I don't want to give the impression that by recording the girth of the tree that can give us an age, because it can't, even though there are age calculators out there that claim to be able to give you a specific age for a tree based on its girth. They're not exactly true. They will never give you a specific age, only an estimate. But it gives us a metric of comparison. You know, we can start comparing species of, with other members of the same species in different environments that maybe have had a similar life history, and start to piece together a picture of what we might expect to see as a typical size for, say, an ancient oak or an ancient ash or an ancient hawthorn. So girth is one of those things we will record, and I'll talk later at the end of the talk about how you record the girth of a tree. But just to show some, oh, sorry, I forgot about this slide. I just wanted to make the point here. When I say about comparing different species, we've actually got a table here. This is fairly dated. It's a 2008 table, but a lot of the data's broadly true still. It shows that there's great variation between species, essentially. So if we look at yew trees at the top of this chart, and we can see based on the coding of this graph for ancient, we might expect yew to be ancient from around about 6 to 6.5 meters in girth. Whereas, you know, let's compare that to the likes of hawthorn. You know, we don't have any hawthorn recorded anywhere near that sort of size. You know, for hawthorn, you would be, you know, if you found a 2 meter hawthorn that is what we call a maiden hawthorn, that's a single stemmed hawthorn, you know, you're really struggling to find many that are above 3 to 4 meters at all. Whereas for a yew tree, you know, that would not even be, that would only just be like locally notable, if not probably not notable at all. So you can use this chart to help you give an idea of, you know, what size is worth recording, or where should I start recording girth from for different species. We have actually got this information on our Ancient Tree Inventory website as well. We've got a species page where you can click into these common species, and it gives examples of, you know, what's an ancient ash look like, or what does a veteran ash or a notable ash kind of look like in terms of its size. Strongly recommend having a look at that if you're embarking on recording trees for the first time or just starting out. It might help to give you an idea of sort of expected sizes. And just to stress, you know, this is very much applicable only to what we call maiden single stem trees. You know, we need to take into account the fact that there are many factors that will affect the growth rate of a tree. Might be the environment, might be the way it's been managed. So, you know, if you've got an oak tree growing in an upland environment, is going to be very different to an oak tree growing, you know, in sunny Devon. So take that into account as well. And the way it's been managed will affect its size. If it has been pollarded, for example, typically, if you were to compare a 300-year-old oak tree, if you've got one that's a maiden, one that's a pollard, the pollard will probably be smaller because it's been regularly cut in its life. It's kind of stunted the growth rate of that tree, and overall it will be smaller than its maiden equivalent. So do bear that in mind as well. So just some other sort of features to look out for. There's a term called retrenchment, which basically refers to the overall reorganization of the tree's crown over time. So we can kind of see an evidence of it here. You can see these dead branches that are sort of sticking out the very top of the canopy of this tree. And this is a natural process that over time, if trees are sort of allowed to live long enough, they change their overall profile from being sort of tall and thin to broad and wide, so and smaller in height overall. So you can see this tree has almost developed a secondary canopy. It would have once been tall and thin, and now you see the tree is invested more in those what were lower subordinate branches at one time is now the dominant part of the canopy. And this bit of deadwood at the top is just a remnant of, you know, that change in the canopy in the past. You can see the tree gradually dies down, it sheds this deadwood, and some of that you'll see on the floor. That can be another feature to look out for. Obviously in some estates and gardens, you know, that deadwood will be tidied away as soon as it falls, but in some places you'll see, you know, big big limbs that have been shed and lost. And it is very much a survival strategy of the tree to do this. So do look out for that. We've talked about hollowing already, and here's an example of an ancient yew in a churchyard, just to go back to my sort of earlier example. Now, hollowing is an absolute key defining feature of an ancient or veteran tree. It won't always be visible. Like, this is quite extreme hollowing, which shows that this tree must be very old indeed. You know, for that hollowing to have taken place, which happens naturally over very long time scales at quite a slow rate. So if you have a tree like this, you know it must be old, but won't always be visible. You know, sometimes you can only see this visible in the base of the tree. The same with veteran trees. You might just see those that hollowing early on, but in the case of our oldest trees, it may be very well established indeed. So do record that if you see it, and always take photographs of trees as well. I think whenever you're taking photos of trees, if you can capture as much information like this as possible in your images that shows the overall sort of condition of the tree, that's really valuable. I was going to talk, well, I'll talk very briefly about functional units, just to say this is another survival strategy of the tree. We think of trees as being like one organism, but as they age, they can lose certain functional units or parts of themselves without losing others. That it enables them to keep on surviving in the long term. So in some cases, you may just have one of these units, which you can see in this image, where I'm sort of showing my cursor. If I trace up down these sort of crevices, each one of those is like a functional unit of the tree that has, you know, all the vessels that are needed to transport water and nutrients around the tree. Essentially, by doing this, you know, as the tree ages, if parts of it die, it means that overall the tree can continue to survive. The tree hasn't lost its entirety. So that can sometimes be tricky to spot this, but just to kind of explain what those kind of grooves and that sort of beveled edge in the trunk looks like. So if you see that, again, take a photograph of it. And another sort of strategy that trees have for surviving is the ability to propagate themselves through what we call layering and sucker growth. So this is an example of a sweet chestnut tree. This is called the Tortworth chestnut. And you can see the limbs on the, well, it can't be called the limbs. This almost an entirely new tree in its own right. But this younger stem has been propagated underground through the original older tree, sort of firing out a root or a shoot underground that has then grown and established a tree that looks like a tree in its own right, but they are genetically linked. They're part of the same tree, and eventually, you know, this larger older part of the tree on the right will die and decay away, and it will be the tree on the left that continues on the legacy of this much older tree. And again, genetically all part of the same tree, but it's a brilliant survival strategy that trees have, in that they can almost indefinitely keep on growing. They're not like us or animals that have a life expectancy as such. You know, in theory, if a tree was allowed to keep growing, it would just continue developing itself, reinventing itself. So these are all good things to look out for. And I think there's part of the fun of the project is looking at a tree and trying to figure out, well, what's going on? You know, what stage of this tree's life am I looking at, and what's its life history, and how has it grown, what's it been influenced by, is all part of the interest as well. There's a term called epicormic growth. Essentially, this is just growth that is almost, you think of it as secondary growth. So it's not the original, this isn't the original canopy of the tree. Essentially, all of the original canopy has been lost, and you've got new shoots that grew out of the side of the trunk there. So within the bark, there's special tissue that can be activated to become a new branch. And the tree has done this over time and has now almost developed an entirely new canopy from this, what we call epicormic growth. It's a good good term to Google later on. So just before I finish up, just wanted to sort of broadly outline the ancient, veteran, notable categories and how they sort of relate, how they sort of hierarchy with each other. So the ancient category is, well, it's those trees that are in their kind of third and final life stage. So it's, you really sort of less likely to find ancient trees. Very few trees become or live long enough to become ancient. But they're typically very large for their species. They're in the third and final life stage, and they'll pretty much definitely show these physical wood decay features that we've been talking about. So that's why it can sometimes be, you stand a greater chance of like finding or being confident that you found an ancient tree because of just the way it will look. It's the veteran category, which I'll talk about in a moment, which is perhaps a little bit broader, and maybe sometimes people struggle more to understand what it is. So I'll actually just skip a few slides ahead so we can look at veteran trees, because I think we've probably covered a lot of what I wanted to talk about with these trees on the slides. So veteran trees are sort of similar to ancient trees in that they show many of the same physical features, but they're not old enough to be truly ancient for their species. So we say that the ancient category is like a life stage. I said it was the third and final life stage. Well, there's no such thing as a veteran life stage. It's more about the condition of the tree. I mean, that said, you're more likely to find a veteran tree as one that's in its sort of mature life stage, or maybe becoming just post-mature. But they'll show similar things, like they may have maybe a larger than average or a girth within the mature range, or a larger than average girth. So look out for that. But what's going to be key is those physical features, such as the heart rot, the decaying limbs. So you can see the example of the ash tree on the left here. It doesn't look like an ancient tree. It doesn't look big enough, or maybe you can look at other evidence like historical maps, which might help to prove that it's not an ancient tree. But it certainly shows those signs of aging, doesn't it? You can see that big hollow in the center of the trunk there. You can see it's clearly shown some signs of dying back and some retrenchment possibly. So on that basis, we refer to it as a veteran tree. This shows it a little bit more clearly as well. You've got an oak tree that is not old enough to be ancient, but the physical features are just very clear with this tree, quite extreme. We've got some other examples. Again, this is a tree I visited in Northern Ireland last year. Loads of bracket fungi visible on the trunk. No signs of hollowing or visible hollowing, but the fungi there highly suggest that this tree is hollowing on the inside there, just because of the extent of the fungi. And you've got a lot of those kind of visual features like epiphytes present as well. Look at the extent of the moss and the ferns. It almost looks like a rainforest tree, how adorned it was with these different epiphytes. And some decaying wood, of course, is visible there as the tree's sort of retrenching and reorganizing itself. So there's a great example of a veteran, but they're not always big. As I said at the start, this is a rowan tree, again showing those signs of aging. Not an ancient tree, but probably bigger than you might typically expect to find for a rowan. Bear in mind that this is growing up in a Welsh upland area, very exposed, so its growth rate is going to be stunted as well. You can start to see how it's splitting apart there as well. And here's another example, a veteran hawthorn tree growing on a field boundary. So it's clearly survived there. It's escaped any sort of clearing that may have been done in the rest of the farmer's field. Often you'll find trees like this along boundaries. They may have been deliberately planted as part of hedgerows or as boundary trees. Some may have just been chance survivors. But again, you can see the fact that this tree is hollowing, and it's probably of a greater than average size for a typical hawthorn tree, but not big enough for us to think that it's an ancient tree, essentially. So that's why we've sort of verified it as a veteran. It's worth saying, just before I go into the notable category here, that as part of recording a tree, you won't be required to record whether you think it's an ancient, veteran, or notable. This is something that we have a special network of volunteer verifiers for the ancient tree inventory, who will assess and make that classification. But I'm just sort of making you aware of these terms, because I think it's really helpful when you're looking for trees to find, to sort of help you to get your eye in and look for trees that may well be significant of recording. So lastly, I appreciate we're sort of coming up towards the end of the talk. Just wanted to mention about notable trees. So these trees will often not show some of those physical features that we've seen, the kind of hollowing and the decay characteristics, but they may be notable for other reasons. So here on the left, we've got a giant sequoia. So this is, a very large tree, typically a large growing tree. In its native habitat, they grow much bigger than that. This is probably about 8 meters in girth, which for a giant sequoia is actually not especially noteworthy, but in a UK context, it certainly is, because based on how long we've had giant sequoia in this country, our oldest and most established examples are probably going to be of this size. So for giant sequoia, it's significant for the UK. So we'd record trees like that. Typically, these are going to be trees that are locally rare, or maybe because of their species or their size. So here we've got an Austrian pine tree, which will never be ancient in the UK because they've not been in the UK long enough to be ancient. And you're unlikely to find many veteran examples as well. But how many Austrian pine trees do you come across like this? It's sort of, and if you did see something like that, you may well think, well, that's noteworthy. I'm going to record that. It belongs on a register somewhere. It deserves recognition as a locally rare tree. Some of these trees may well have, a person or a significance of the place. They may as well share some of that kind of, it may just simply be aesthetically valuable, as we said for ancient and veteran trees when we're talking about values. They may just simply be, a very prominent feature of the landscape. So here we've got an oriental plane tree growing in a this is a school campus, and you can see it's clearly been retained and respected as a feature of the campus. They've even fenced it off, and clearly the owners here value this tree. And you're not going to find many, oriental plane of that size, probably in the UK alone, never mind within that county. So, and the next example shows a similar thing. But rather than talk about that slide, I think we should finish up by talking about the actual recording elements. So, Devon Treescapes have a specific app for recording data about trees. So it's, when I say app, this isn't a mobile app that you can download via the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. This is a web-based way of capturing data that's basically been developed to make the process as easy as possible, so you can enter the key information about your trees. Now, within it, we've already imported the ancient tree inventory records. These are the red dots that you can see on the map below. So the first thing really, I suppose, would be to check that tree hasn't already been recorded, just to save duplicating it. So it's a very good habit to get into if you can. You can also check the ancient tree inventory website as well, of course, which will give you the live or latest data. But essentially, when you sort of open the app, it's very self-explanatory in terms of how it guides you through in entering the data. First of all, you need to pick the species of tree. I think we've got a link there to the Woodland Trust tree identification app as well there, which you can use. For the most part, particularly with ancient and veteran trees, you're probably going to be recording common native species. But in the case of notable trees, your kind of species mix might be a bit broader. So it's a great excuse to kind of brush up on your tree identification as well. And if there are any trees that you're not sure of, I recommend, maybe taking a photo of the leaves as well, because when it comes to reviewing the records, if you can't identify the species, it might be that someone else can if you've got a good photo of the bark or the buds or the leaves. So just select the species if you know it, and select the right option. After that, you'll be asked to give some information about the location of the tree. So it allows you to record the access status as well. So you can say whether it's on public land or private land. So just use the drop down menu there. And the size of the tree, what we mean here is the circumference or the girth of the trunk. So this is normally the narrowest girth that you record at or below 1.5 meter height on the trunk. So typically you're looking at sort of chest height or shoulder height, and you're trying to get the narrowest girth that you can from the trunk. Now, in some cases, you may have to record slightly lower than that if the tree has a low branch, or if it's got like a burr, or some gnarly parts of the trunk that sort of would create an exaggerated girth measurement. You want to just record below those, so you are recording the narrowest part of the trunk that you can. Of course, if you're not sure of the girth because you can't measure the tree, then you can just put an estimated value as well. Just make sure to tick the box. On the next page, you've got height of tree. So I think this is just an estimate as well. You can use this as a reference. How does it relate to the size of a house? Is it smaller than a house, the same size as a house, or taller than a house? So just select the best option that you think of based on your judgment there. And then after that, you're very nearly done. So you can record any veteran or decay features here. So you'll see these as a tick box. Just tick all that apply if it has a hollowing trunk, or if it has rot holes or decay in the canopy. Just tick all of those that apply there. You can make any notes if there's anything else that you want to capture about the tree. You can capture that in the notes too. And finally, don't forget to take a photo. It's highly useful for us when we're looking at the data. Really helps us to build an overall like a better quality database, but also in terms of, I guess, encouraging people to go visit these trees. I guess people are more likely going to visit them, respect them, treasure them if they've seen a photo and they think, wow, that's a brilliant tree, I want to go visit it. So, and don't forget to record decay features and any kind of other evidence in those photos as well. So that concludes sort of my part of the talk. So I ran over slightly there, but I'm going to pass back to Lindsay now, who's just going to finish up, and then we've got time for some questions if you have any. So Lindsay, over to you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I hope everyone here will agree with me that was a very, very interesting presentation. You've got some stunning trees in your photographs as well, so thank you very much for sharing those with us. Right, everybody here is now ready to start recording. So the good news is that this wonderful presentation will be available for you to watch again or to refresh your memory on some parts of it anytime you want to. It will be on the Devon Wildlife Trust YouTube channel, hopefully from tomorrow afternoon. But what I will do once it's up there is send everybody a follow-up message from this event this evening, just with some of the useful links that we've mentioned and that have been on the slides, and with that link to the YouTube presentation as well, so you can have a look at it again if you like. Other events from Saving Devon's Treescapes are on Eventbrite and also on the Wildlife Trust's website on our events page. So do have a look at what else is coming up on some of those other subjects. The citizen science species that we're monitoring will be on there as well. We're doing brown hair streaks and lichens monitoring at the moment. So if you're interested in those, please do have a look and or get in touch. Next slide, please, Tom. So that is it. We do have nearly 10 minutes left to answer some of your questions. I'm going to leave that slide up as well in case anybody wants to jot down some of the links now. The recording app that we are using for this work is the second one down, devontreescapes.com. And as Tom said, it is a web-based app. It is smartphone compatible. So if you are out and about just in the course of your normal adventures across Devon and you come across a tree that does make you stop and go, wow, then please do take a photo of it and jot the details down so that you can put them through and submit them in our app. We'd very much appreciate it. Okay, I've been jotting down some of the questions that have come in as Tom has been speaking, so I will start with those and we'll hopefully get through as many of them, if not all of them, if we can. So the first one, Tom, is with that picture you showed of the layering and suckering, does that apply to all species of trees? Do they all do that? And how can you tell whether a stand is a new tree that's a sap grown from a sapling and a seed, or whether it's a result of suckering?
No, that's a good question. So some species do this more than others. You notice it a lot with common lime, will do it a lot. Willow, hawthorn, rowan, maybe even hazel as well. Hazel is particularly prone to sort of growing in almost like a coppice form as well. So yeah, in terms of how you recognize, if I just go back to the slide, actually, if that's okay, I will just skip back to that picture of the talk with chestnut. Sorry for making people a bit dizzy here. Maybe I'll just, there we go, there it is. Oops. So in terms of, yeah, I often get that question when we have this photo put up. So I think it's easier to see in person than it is on this photograph. But what you'll see from here, if I just sort of trace down with my cursor, you can see as we trace down to the right hand side, so the gap between the big hulk of tree on the right and the newer stem is quite small. But when you're there in person, you can kind of see that is above soil level. You can kind of see the continuation of the bark there. I think as well, the way that this younger stem has grown away from the main trunk suggests that it's, you know, that the tree is sort of growing to not out compete itself. It's sort of more laid down as like a sucker growth that's sort of gone off at an angle rather than a seed that has landed straight down and grown sort of straight up. It sort of suggests that the tree is connected. It's not always possible to tell, of course, but so it's a case of just trying to, I guess, look at what you can see. You can only ever really record what you see with this project, and you know, maybe don't always assume would be my advice, but where possible, if you can record this like in the photograph so it's quite clear, you know, take a wider shot from a different angle perhaps. Yeah, sometimes, you know, it's just lost, you know, that history is lost by the way the soil is built up. But yeah, where sometimes it's possible to see, it's just more on a case by case basis, I think.
That's great, thank you. Is there a good basic reference that you'd recommend that describes the various functional features like the buttressing and grooves and?
Yeah, there is a good textbook, actually. It's available via the Ancient Tree Forum's website, and the first chapter is brilliant. It's got some great diagrams as well. I can make sure I share a link when that goes with the wrap up email.
Yeah,
it's basically it's a book by David Lonsdale. It's available via the resources section of the Ancient Tree Forum website. It's available as a free ebook. You can download it and have it on your computer or your iPad or your phone if you want to. But of course, the Ancient Tree Inventory website has a lot of that information sort of interpreted as well. For anyone who is looking for, I guess, something a bit more technical, I also advise the specialist survey method, which was it's a veteran tree specialist survey method, which was kind of used in the late 1990s or early noughties as a way of capturing. And when you look at that, you'll see that the Ancient Tree Inventory recording protocol is very similar to the more technical specialist survey method. There's some great diagrams within the survey form. It's just very, very in depth, you know, way more in depth than what the web-based app is, but still kind of is useful additional information. So yeah, I can make sure I include links to those for those who might be interested, for sure.
Thank you very much. That would be useful. Obviously, a couple of people have asked, we're collecting all this data, what happens to it next? Where does it go? What use can be made of it?
Yeah, of course. So, I mean, in terms of how I'm just going to go back to the end slide before I do it, just in case. I know some people may have been wanting to jot down those URLs. Oops, there we go. I'll just leave that slide up. Obviously, in terms of what the Woodland Trust does with the data, we could probably give quite a big answer to that. I mean, in terms of, obviously, we're really interested in how's that data being used within the, the Devon treescape context. That may be one for a later talk, or maybe you could provide some answer to that within our wrap-up email. But certainly, our long-term hope is that the data recorded via the Devon project here will make its way into the Ancient Tree Inventory website, so we can batch import that data. And initially, it will go on probably as what we call unverified data. So anyone can register with the website at the moment and add a tree. It initially goes on as an unverified tree, and then we have a team of volunteer verifiers who will go out and they will make that classification and that decision as to whether the tree is a notable or an ancient or a veteran. Like I say, it's not something you need to decide at the time of recording. But in terms of how we might use this data, it helps us to build a picture of where our ancient and veteran trees are and their distribution, and particularly thinking about sites as well, triple SIs and local wildlife sites. I really like to think that in the future we will use ancient tree population as another criteria for helping to inform the designation of those important sites. The Woodland Trust uses this information when looking at trees under threat. So we often get trees reported to us as being threatened from development, for example, or HS2, for example, and we can cross compare the impacts of those threats with the ancient tree inventory, or location data about ancient trees, to see whether those developments are going to affect those trees and whether we need to intervene or campaign to protect them. So there's a whole array of ways we can use this data from a protection point of view, from a conservation point of view, but also haven't even really touched on we even get interest from artists and photographers and people wanting to write books, and people wanting to make films that feature ancient. There's a whole series of ways you could use this data set, to be honest, and yeah, so possibilities are endless in that sense.
Fantastic. We are now out of time, so I'm just going to add to that from the Devon point of view very, very briefly, just to echo what you've said, really, Tom, that the intention with the Saving Devon's Treescapes app data is that it will all be shared with the Woodland Trust, so it becomes part of the national picture as well. So there is no need, if you're uploading data to the Saving Devon's Treescapes app, to also upload the same data to the Woodland Trust's ATI, because the two will match up. And the same uses in Devon as well. So the data all ends up in the Devon Biodiversity Record Centre, which is the repository for all biodiversity data in Devon, and is available to be searched by planning authorities, and for use in ecology surveys and for multiple other uses as well. So very many possibilities, as you say, Tom. I think we're going to have to leave it there now, folks. So thank you very much for hanging on till the end, and I hope you found that question and answer session helpful, as well as the presentation itself. Do look out for an email from us in the next couple of days with those links, more information on some of the questions that you've asked tonight as well. I think, Tom, just a virtual round of applause from everybody here. Thank you very much for your time and for sharing your expertise with us tonight.
And thank you very much for having me along to talk about the project, and good luck to everyone on the call who will go on to record ancient trees. Hope you enjoy doing so. It's a really sort of addictive project to be involved with. I warn you, you'll find that you can't take your ancient tree goggles off once you get started. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it and look forward to seeing what trees you find.
Fantastic. Thanks everybody for joining us, and hopefully see you at another event very soon. Good night.
Thanks, everyone.